Now, with the Eastern Orthodox and their relations with Oriental Orthodox, it really depends from one jurisdiction to the other, from one patriarch to another, and from one Eastern Orthodox bishop to another. You'll find situations. So I actually dated a Coptic Orthodox lady, and even amongst themselves, especially amongst the Copts, they're not even sure of what the differences are. They're not even aware that there are differences. They see Orthodox Church on one sign, and well, you might say Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, but they assume, other than obviously cultural and linguistic differences, they assume, well, Orthodox is Orthodox. But they might be surprised, because for a Copt, if they approach a number of Greek bishops or Greek priests, they may be denied communion, because they say, well, the Copts either are heretics, or at best they might say, well, they're still schismatic, so therefore they cannot receive communion in our church. Fair enough. And then with the Russians as well, the Russians tend to be a little more rigid when it comes to this. I hate using that term rigid, because it often has a negative connotation, but I don't mean it in that sense. But regardless, the Russians are much more strict with who can receive Holy Communion, because there is no official reconciliation with the Oriental Orthodox. So quite often they would reject a Coptic Orthodox or an Oriental Orthodox from receiving communion in a Russian Orthodox church. But now there's other groups of Orthodox, such as the Antiochian Orthodox, for example. The Antiochian Orthodox have a reputation of being much more, I don't want to use the term liberal, but it seems to be really the only term that would fit, or much more welcoming to outsiders. If you go into an Antiochian Orthodox parish, at least in Canada anyways, and I've heard this as well from friends in the United States, that you're going to see a much higher number of converts, and you're going to see people that are not necessarily from Syria, or not necessarily even from the Middle East. You'll see lots of born and raised Americans there that are obviously of Western European ancestry. And so they have a reputation amongst the Antiochian Orthodox of being much more friendly to converts. And I've been to pretty much all of them. I've been to basically every flavor of Orthodox church you can think of at some point or another. And I must say that the Antiochian Orthodox, they are much less of an ethnic club than when you go to maybe a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox. And that's not a criticism of all the various ethnic Orthodox churches, because you can go to Catholic churches and find the exact same thing. We have in the area, and actually a large number of them, but one in particular, a Polish Catholic church. I called there, for example, back a while ago, and dealing with a personal matter, and the first question was, well, are you Polish? Well, if you're not Polish, then the response was, well, why would you be calling here? So certainly that's a criticism of some Catholic churches as well, but we don't have that quite as much as you'll find in ethnic Orthodox parishes. Anyways, the relations between the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox amongst some jurisdictions, and so the Orthodox Church of America, which was originally a autocephalous church, and well, still is a autocephalous jurisdiction of the Russian Orthodox Church, but now they function as independent, and they're still in communion with the Russians and all the other Orthodox jurisdictions, but you'll see a lot more converts and bishops and priests who are not Russian in the OCA, or the Orthodox Church of America. And there you'll see, much friendlier relations with Copts, from what I understand, and these other Oriental Orthodox groups. In many cases, they'll even give them communion. Now, with the Catholic Church, so with the new Code of Canon Law, it actually permits Orthodox, both Easterns and Orientals, to receive Holy Communion from a Catholic priest, both Western and Eastern Rite Catholic priests. So I'm not going to get into all the details of why this permission was made. It wasn't made before the new Code of Canon Law. Before, it was strictly Catholics could receive Holy Communion. But for various reasons, the Catholic Church has permitted Orthodox Christians to receive the sacraments from Catholic clergy, provided that the circumstance is that the Orthodox person presents themselves and asks for it. So it's not a case of the Catholic priest is supposed to go out of his way to give this Orthodox person a Catholic Eucharist. So that's not the case. But if the Orthodox person were to present themselves and ask for Holy Communion, the Catholic priest is allowed to give it. Now, unfortunately, a lot of Catholic priests, or at least some of them, they give Holy Communion to just about anyone anyway. So that doesn't even seem to be an issue. But I'm talking about the actual canon law. So they can give it to both an Eastern and an Oriental Orthodox. Now, the reason is, and the rationale is because these people, they believe in the exact same teaching regarding Holy Communion, or regarding the Holy Eucharist, as Catholics do. They believe in, although they often don't use this term transubstantiation, but even if you look back into the Confession of Dositheos, he was the Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem in the 17th century. In his confession, which was a repudiation of Calvinism, in his confession he uses the term transubstantiation, which is a term that originates with St. Thomas Aquinas, who in turn borrowed it from Greek philosophy. But they believe in the exact same thing. So they believe that the bread and wine become the true body and blood of Jesus Christ. Now, they use leavened bread for the Eucharist, and oftentimes both the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox, they actually put it into the cup. And so when you receive communion, you actually receive it on a spoon. Now, that's not standard across all Oriental Orthodox, but across most Eastern Orthodox it is. But it's interesting. You'll go into some Oriental Orthodox parishes and you'll see large differences. So the Armenian Orthodox, as an example, when you look at their churches and their altars and whatnot, it looks very Western. They don't have an icon screen there. Their altars, for the most part, it looks very similar to what you would see at a Maronite parish or in an Armenian parish. But then you'll go to a Coptic church and it looks much closer to an Eastern Orthodox, although you can see the Western influence there as well. So the icon screens that you see in Eastern Orthodox churches were something that appeared much later in the Byzantine rites and in the Coptic rites, or the Alexandrian rite. It appeared much later. They didn't use icon screens until I believe around the 5th century, or the 5th or 6th century is when they date the use of holy icons. Doesn't mean that the principle is wrong to use icons, but they didn't actually have an icon screen in their churches until that time, from what I understand. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that point. So, but in the Coptic churches, you'll see it looks much more Byzantine. But they actually have their own style for icons. It's, in a certain sense, it's much more simplistic, their icons. They have similar style to the Byzantine, but yet they have their own distinct Coptic style as well, which I find very interesting. Some people, I actually know on Facebook, a lady out in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, who is Eastern Orthodox, she actually prefers the Coptic style icons, which I find interesting. Because personally, I prefer the Byzantine style. But to each their own. I mean, there's no right or wrong. And now, another interesting tidbit before I end this very long conversation on this, but I could talk about this subject all day because I do find it quite fascinating. But when I was dating this Coptic Orthodox lady, we actually went to a Coptic Catholic Mass, or Divine Liturgy. And the interesting thing that she was surprised at, now there's only 4 Coptic Catholic parishes in all of North America, which I was surprised to learn as well. But there's a very small number of Coptic Catholics. But anyways, we went to this Mass, we went to this Divine Liturgy, and she was surprised that the liturgy is almost exactly the same as it is at the Coptic Orthodox Church. Almost identical. And it was in Arabic, so Arabic and Coptic, so I didn't understand most of the liturgy, but I can recognize the parts of it. But from her words, there was very few differences in the liturgy, if any at all. The only real difference is that, so you go to most Coptic Orthodox parishes, and most of the time the Coptic Orthodox, they separate men and women. Men sit on the left-hand side, and women will sit on the right-hand side. Unless they're married, sometimes they will sit together. And then in Canada, or maybe in the United States as well, if you go to maybe some of the more younger parishes or parishes with more converts, they mix a little bit. But still, the principle is there that in most Coptic Orthodox churches, they separate men and women. And then also, so most of the ladies in the Coptic parishes, they don't cover their heads until it's time for communion. And then the women must cover their heads. They must wear a veil to receive Holy Communion. So that's a little bit different, because in the Coptic Catholic Mass, some women were covered, but most of them didn't. And I don't know if that's a much more new development or not, but anyways, so that was one of the biggest differences she noticed. And then another interesting difference is, or something that people may find interesting, is that at Holy Communion, so at least in the Coptic Church, and I'm not 100% sure of maybe the Armenians or the Syrians, but at least at the Coptic Church, so when they receive Holy Communion, so they first walk up and they receive the Holy Body, and then they go for a second round and receive His precious blood. Whereas at the Byzantine, you'll receive it from a cup, and you'll receive the bread inside of the wine and on a spoon, and you'll have Holy Communion, the Holy Eucharist, dropped into your mouth. So that's a little bit different. I found those differences interesting. That's all I have to say about that, and that's all for now.